Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where I recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and today's the 3rd of August, 2021. Alright everyone, let's get into it. So, the Bankless ETH Hub live stream for EIP 1559 was announced today. So I'm going to be joining Ryan, Sean Adams, David Hoffman, DC Investor, Justin Drake, Hudson Jameson, and Eric Connor for this live stream on approximately 8 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Thursday, in Eastern Time in the US, sorry. So for me, that is, I think, late night, like 10 or 11 p.m. at night on Thursday, and I think for Europe it would be maybe around 1-2 o'clock or something like that. But anyway, you can go to the link here, and set a reminder for yourselves. But this is going to be really cool, I think. I mean, it's 1559 week, as they've said here. They've actually got other things happening during this week. Today, they've got an EIP 1559 expert panel happening on Bankless here, and then they've got the live stream with us on Thursday, and then Thursday as well, a couple of hours after, there's going to be a live recording of the Bankless podcast with DC Investor, Squish Crypto, and James Wang here. So yeah, really cool to see Bankless having so much coverage here. I mean, I love listening to their podcasts that they do, and I think this one with the expert panel here with Tim Baiko, Barnaby Mono, I think that's how you say his name, Hazu, Light Clients, and Micah Zoltu is going to be really interesting because they've been some of the people at the forefront of 1559 research and development. So definitely tune into that as well. But I hope to see you all at the live stream here on Thursday. So, we've been going over on the Refuel lately, and I'm sure you've seen on Twitter about this kind of like crypto regulation that's been stuffed into the infrastructure bill. Now, the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, put together a thread today, which basically says, here are 6 reasons we hate the new cryptocurrency surveillance provision buried in Biden's infrastructure bill. And I'll read out each reason because it's not going to take me too long to do so. But the first reason is it will require new surveillance of everyday users of cryptocurrency. Secondly, it could force software creators and others who do not custody cryptocurrency for their users to implement cumbersome surveillance systems or stop offering services in the United States. This would apply to things like decentralized exchanges because they are non-custodial, but it would be expected that somehow the decentralized exchange operators, or at least the smart contract owners, if there was like an admin key there, they would have to basically surveil their customers through KYC AML and reporting and all that sorts of stuff. And it's obviously unworkable for something like Uniswap, which is totally decentralized, the protocol layer. So yeah, it's just a misguided regulation there. The third reason is it will create more honeypots of private information about cryptocurrency users that could attract malicious actors. I mean, that's just a no-brainer. Anytime you have kind of like reporting requirements, you're just basically reporting on users and creating these treasure troves of basically private information that can, or probably will be sooner or later, kind of hacked and leaked on the internet. We've had plenty of those play out in the past, not just within cryptocurrency, obviously with the Ledger leak that happened a few months ago, but also generally across like the Web 2 space. The fourth reason here, it will create more legal complexity to developing blockchain projects or verifying transactions in the United States, likely leading to more innovation moving overseas. I mean, this is self-explanatory and a no-brainer. You start clamping down too hard on crypto and crypto companies, they're just going to move to friendlier jurisdictions. We've already seen this play out somewhat. We've seen people move for tax reasons too. There's a lot of people moving because the tax laws in the US aren't exactly, depending on the state, aren't exactly very, very kind or very favorable, and there's really not much guidance there. So we've already seen this been happening over the last few years. The fifth reason is it is impossible for miners and developers to comply with these new reporting requirements. So one of the, I guess, most kind of like hardcore of the regulations in this bill is that it will require miners and stakers to report on, I guess, like the users. So essentially, I mean, the reason why this is crazy is because like every I guess like user of a chain is essentially someone that the miners and stakers are servicing. Because if they mine a block or propose a block as a staker or attest to a block or build on top of the blockchain when they're kind of like mining it and building on top of the canonical chain, it basically leads to them having to report on basically every single user of the chain, which makes absolutely no sense and is really, really insane. So I think that one's actually probably the most hardcore requirement and totally unworkable, right? And the sixth, it creates uncertainty about the ability to conduct cryptocurrency transactions directly with others via open source code, for example, through smart contracts and decentralized exchanges. As I explained before, this would just be like really, open a can of worms that just isn't something that's workable in any kind of like fashion. or anything like that. So, the EFF also posted a blog post here where you can kind of like read a bit more information about this and kind of like, I mean, it's kind of lengthy, not too lengthy, but like it's much more, much longer than the Twitter thread and gives a lot of good context around here. Now, I've been talking about this for a little while on the refuel for, I guess, like the past week or so. And I've been covering tweet threads from like Jake Chavinsky, from Coin Center people and things like that. I think there's still amendments being made to this bill. There's still a lot of things happening here. As I said, this is like an infrastructure bill, which means it is something that is totally unrelated to cryptocurrency. So cryptocurrency regulations don't even have any, I guess, like business being in here. But if they are going to be in there, we should really make sure that they are basically really light regulation, or something that at least is workable and makes sense and doesn't kind of like create these insane draconic laws around crypto in the US. Because as much as you can say, oh, people can just move to friendly jurisdictions, the US is probably the biggest kind of like consumer of cryptocurrency to this day. Obviously, China has recently cracked down on cryptocurrency, both on mining and on centralized exchanges. So the kind of like China, the China activity is slowing down, unfortunately, because of that. But parts of like other parts of Asia are picking up the slack there. There's a lot of activity happening in Southeast Asia with crypto. Europe is obviously big, but I think the United States is still by far the biggest kind of player in the crypto scene. So we definitely don't want these regulations going through and kind of like slowing down the innovation happening in the US around crypto. And, I guess kind of like forcing a little bit of a reset, or at least stalling the crypto industry. Because if there are these regulations, it would basically mean, if these go in place, it would basically mean a lot of the US kind of based teams and a lot of the US activity for crypto would have to slowly move overseas, and that could take years. So it's better to nip this in the bud before it goes through than just say, oh, if it goes through, we can just like leave the country. I mean, that's like the worst case scenario. That is not the optimal path. The optimal path is making sure that these draconian regulations don't go in the first place. So Askew on Twitter today posted this interesting chart, which I wrote about in the Daily Gwei newsletter, but essentially it shows kind of like the stablecoin market cap share between like the most popular stablecoins. You can see here, USDT is 62% of total stablecoin market cap, USDC is 27.4%, TUSD is only 1.2%, DAI 5.6%, BUSD is 12%, and there's a couple of others in there as well, but you get the idea. What I wrote about in the newsletter today is that I actually think this is a really positive development. Now, up until like a few years ago, up until USDC kind of started growing, especially through DeFi, Tether basically had like 90% plus dominance on the stablecoin industry, probably higher than that. I mean, for a long time, they had like almost 100% dominance. And obviously, there's been a lot of drama about Tether over the years. It's totally opaque. There's barely any transparency into Tether. There's shady stuff going on, and people really don't like the fact that the crypto ecosystem is so reliant on Tether, and for good reason. But now that we have had the USDC growth, it's kind of like chipping into Tether's market share, same with BUSD. But really, all we're doing with these other centralized stablecoins is replacing the old boss with a new boss that is exactly the same as the old boss, right? Okay, maybe not exactly the same, but still very similar. You could argue that USDC is more transparent than USDT, which, to be fair, it probably is. You could say that it's been less shady historically. It's based directly in the US, so it has more oversight, things like that. BUSD, I would consider pretty shady because like it's directly tied to Binance, and Binance has been coming under fire a lot by regulators recently. And then, there's DAI as a decentralized alternative at 5.6% of market share, but a lot of DAI is backed by USDC these days. So can you even call DAI a decentralized stablecoin? That's up for debate as well. And then you have like the long tail of all these other experiments playing out, such as the algorithmic stablecoins, which pretty much most of them have blown up at this point. You have things like Fei Protocol. You have Rye. There's a bunch of others out there. I mean, there's some I guess like hybrid algorithmic, kind of like decentralized stablecoins. I mean, there's so many of them right now. I've lost track. But they are nowhere near kind of competing with USDC and USDT. I mean, they basically have a duopoly on stablecoins at this point in time. Now, because of this, I've seen people kind of bring up an argument that, oh, well, these stablecoin issuers are like kingmakers on Ethereum now. If there was like a chain split, they would be the ones to kind of like, I guess, choose which chain won in a controversial hard fork. And I kind of get the argument, because essentially what that would mean was Circle, the issuer of USDC, would basically say, okay, well, on this chain, we're going to honor USDC redemptions, and on this chain, we are not, which means that the one that they are not, all the USDC on there would be worthless, go to zero, DeFi blows up, essentially, right? Like all the liquidity pools kind of blow up there, people get liquidated, things just start falling apart. But in saying that, the same thing could be said for something like a centralized exchange. For example, what if a centralized exchange saw this kind of controversial split, or at least a bunch of the centralized exchanges, and said, okay, well, I'm only going to support the ETH on this chain and not on the other chain. This is the real ETH. This is the one that's worth $2,500, and the other ETH can be worth whatever the market thinks is worth, but we're not going to list it, sort of thing, right? The kind of the other chain's ETH. So are they not kingmakers in that regard, right? Like, are they not exerting like lots of power over the ecosystem? And we saw this play out with the fork wars in 2017 with Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, where there were a bunch of exchanges going to support the fork that was basically going to reject SegWit, essentially. But then at the last minute, they kind of caved and said that, okay, well, it's better that we do Bitcoin Cash, that we split off and just do Bitcoin Cash instead of kind of like causing drama with Bitcoin. And I think from that, there's like very strong precedent that these big central entities like exchanges and stablecoin issuers, they do not pick which chain wins in a controversial split. The users pick that. The users always pick that. The whole ecosystem coming together picks that. And the users aren't just like people like me and you using the chain every day. The users consist of pretty much like every entity, every stakeholder within the system, whether they be centralized exchanges or the issuers of stablecoins, whether they be the DeFi projects, the infrastructure around that. All the kind of like other kind of like peripheral things, like not just the big exchanges, but like the small brokerages things, and those people getting involved, the core developers, obviously, stuff like that. And if the majority of those kind of like people say that this chain is the real Ethereum in a controversial split, well, then that chain is the real Ethereum. Like that, it's as simple as that. That's how the decentralized governance process works within Ethereum, and we've seen this play out with with tons of things within Ethereum over the years, with all the network upgrades that have happened. For example, EIP 1559. We saw that the miners were against it, and they're probably still against it, but they caved because they realized that they're not going to win that fight. The rest of the ecosystem wants 1559 to go ahead, and it is going ahead this week. Even if they kind of tried to fork off and basically fork their own version of Ethereum without 1559, they know that no one would use it. And in doing that, the DeFi ecosystem on that chain would also fall apart, because, as I said, Circle, the issuer of USDC, for example, is only going to honor the USDC on the chain with 1559 on it, because that is the chain that most of the ecosystem is backing. So forking Ethereum is actually really hard, because you have this thing where essentially Ethereum, the minority chain blows itself up because of things like DeFi, where none of that stuff will work if you're on the minority chain. It's not like with Bitcoin, where it's just that BTC or like the BCH asset or things like that. With Ethereum, your fork is only as good as the apps on it, because Ethereum's use case and Ethereum's kind of appeal is the apps at the end of the day. Like, if Ethereum was just ETH, right, and that's it, like it was just like an alternative to Bitcoin, it just had like a different monetary policy or whatever. Say it was similar to something like Litecoin, because Litecoin really is just a fork of Bitcoin with a couple of parameters changed. Well, look at Litecoin's valuation compared to Bitcoin. It is worth way, way, way less than Bitcoin. Whereas a Bitcoin compared to Ethereum there's a much smaller gap there. So from that perspective, you can kind of like see how this has played out in the past, how it will play out into the future, and why any kind of like minority chain, or at least like a chain that's forked off in a controversial fork that becomes the minority, based on the whole ecosystem coming together and deciding on this, will basically quickly die out, because no one will use it. It just doesn't mean anything. And you can see this with Ethereum Classic, for example. Even though Ethereum Classic was born out of I guess like a much more controversial thing that I think we're going to see going forward within Ethereum, it's just we have so much precedent for this. We have so much evidence of what's happened kind of like in the past, and we can kind of like gauge what would happen in the future in a scenario like this. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of like cover that, because I've been seeing a bit of debate about this on Twitter recently, and I think that it's a lot more nuanced than just saying that, because USDC is so ingrained in DeFi, it makes Circle the kingmaker. Well, I don't think that's the case, because you could make the same argument for centralized exchanges by saying because they're so ingrained in onboarding people onto Ethereum that these centralized exchanges could pick which Ethereum was the real one. And maybe if they wanted to, they could. If they wanted to go against the consensus of everyone else, that's their prerogative. They can do that. But the thing is, the game theory holds that if they do that, well, they're just shooting themselves in the foot, because they are on the minority chain and they basically lose the customer base, and then it kind of becomes a game of chicken of which exchange caves first to the community, and then you have like they all fall like dominoes in the end. And I actually think that centralized exchanges really don't want to take in a position on any of this sort of stuff. They usually stay out of the governance stuff that's happening, and I think that's a really good idea for them to do. And the same thing with these stablecoin issuers. I think that they know that if they try to work against the ecosystem, they're going to quickly learn what centralized governance means. That's for sure. But yeah. Anyway, I wrote a little bit more about that in the newsletter today. But that basically I recap what I wrote in the newsletter. But I think it's really important just to keep in mind about how the governance process in Ethereum works and why there is no kingmakers within Ethereum. So Hayden Adams posted this tweet on Twitter today, basically saying how it started. And there's this picture on the left here, this meme. For those of you listening in, the meme is like the four people, the three guys and one woman here, standing in standing in a row here, with someone in a pink shirt on the left, and then white, and then blue, and then in a kind of like a wacky kind of shirt on the right here. With Bill Murray. I don't know all the actors' names here. I only know Bill Murray. So if you know which kind of meme I'm talking about, if you're only listening to it, then you know what I'm talking about. But then Hayden Adams posted on the right here a picture of himself on the left in kind of like a pink or a pink kind of shirt here. Kane next to him in a white shirt. This person on the kind of like next to Kane in the blue is actually here. I don't actually know his name, unfortunately. But he's basically I think like the head of PleaserDAO. Essentially here, and then on the right you have Robert Leshner from Compound. So they were kind of like recreating this. And why I thought this was funny was that not only did they recreate this picture here, but they also did something else on crypto Twitter today, where they all bought and changed their profile pictures to these wild kind of like white-haired punks. Now, what's really funny about this, and this is what I really wanted to talk about, was that these white-haired punks weren't anything special before these kind of like people bought them, because they were just like I don't think they were rare. I think they were just kind of like and they're not necessarily kind of like appealing either. Like you look at this and you're just kind of like, oh, okay, like wild white hair, who cares, kind of thing. But because the like Kane and Hayden and Robert bought these white-haired punks, the other white-haired punks started catching bids and started going for a lot more, and all of a sudden became rare. And it's just really funny when you look at this from like a cultural perspective, because that's what these NFTs and specifically CryptoPunks are, is that it's the culture. Now the culture is basically, hey, these really popular DeFi founders changed their profile pictures and bought like white-haired punks, which are worth like $200,000 or something like that. Now white-haired punks are valuable, which I thought was just really funny. And the other thing that was funny about this was that earlier in the day, Robert Leshner put out a tweet who said, "Who is in crypto in New York City this second and wearing blue? Need you for a mission." And that mission was obviously this. And it's amazing that they found someone that was actually, playing a big part in the Ethereum community here. I think his name is Jamies. The kind of like head of PleaserDAO and like he just dressed the part perfectly, right? Like you can see from the two images here, he just dressed the part perfectly. But this is like hilarious. This is what I love about the Ethereum community and the Ethereum ecosystem, is that not only did they recreate this picture like perfectly, I reckon this is hilarious, because like in the original meme, everyone was saying that the person on the left looked exactly like Hayden Adams from Uniswap, which I thought was really funny. But not only did they do that, but they also bought like all these punks simultaneously, and they kind of started a movement behind a punk that wasn't necessarily rare before, but is now considered rare. So it's just pretty funny when you look at these sorts of things. And this is kind of like what I talk about when I talk about like NFTs and culture, and how the culture sets the value of these things. And maybe that gives you a bit more insight into why people are coveting punks so much. I just think this is wild. And this is only the first kind of thing we've seen of this. There's going to be plenty of like celebrities much bigger than these DeFi founders that are going to be doing changing their profile pictures to punks and other NFTs. And we've already seen some of them doing it. And I think this is going to be like a massive cultural shift, not just within crypto, but outside of it as well. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how that all plays out. So Ben DiFrancesco put out an interesting little tweet thread here today where he says, "My bet, the EVM stack is locked in. It's past the point of critical mass. Nothing is going to catch it. every layer 2 sidechain and alternate L1 will add either EVM compatibility or fade to obscurity. And then he continued on a little bit in this thread here. But essentially, this is what I've been saying, and I've written about this in the newsletter before, where the EVM really is the moat at the moment. Because if you look at all the chains that have gained traction, whether they be side chains or other L1s, they've been EVM compatible. And that's because that EVM compatibility lends itself to all the apps that are already existing on Ethereum just being able to be cloned onto these chains. We saw that happen with BSC. We've seen that happen with Polygon. We've seen that happen with some of the L2s like Optimism, even though Optimism requires a little bit of changes there, but things like Arbitrum. So it means that the developers don't need to rewrite their smart contracts. They don't need to get them audited again. They don't need to kind of like fragment their code base or anything like that. They can essentially just deploy the same thing and upgrade the same thing on either kind of chains here. Now, Ben goes on to say, and then he puts out the second tweet here where he quotes, someone saying, but there's this thing that's wrong with the EVM and this other thing is better. And then Ben says, you might be right, but it doesn't change what I said. C, JavaScript, etc. This is how low-level technology adoption works. And he's right. I mean, there's plenty of examples of technology that is probably inferior to kind of like better technology, but went on to become the dominant thing because of the fact that they had early network effects. And those network effects are very hard to break once they've developed out. And I think that, the EVM is in that kind of point. And not just the EVM, but Solidity as a smart contracting language and all the tooling built around that. So, I think that's just going to be true going forward. And I think that any other chain that doesn't do EVM compatibility is going to have a very, very hard time getting any sorts of adoption. But even still, there's going to be diminishing returns. Not every chain that has EVM compatibility is going to be able to get any kind of like market share or have any kind of usage. It really just depends on a variety of factors. And the more chains that do it, the more diminishing returns there are there. And finally here, Ben says, in short, don't listen to Udi. And Udi put out a tweet back on Jan 5th, 2019. So this is 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago now, where he said, the worst time to learn Solidity was a year ago. The second worst time is now. Well, if you learned Solidity in January of 2019, you probably joined an early DeFi project and probably sitting on a lot of money right now because that DeFi project probably tokenized. You got a share in that. And, you could use those Solidity skills for whatever else as well. So yeah, don't listen to trolls like Udi, that's for sure. But yeah, I thought this was just interesting from Ben. As I said, I wrote about this in the Daily Gwei newsletter. If you want, you can Google that. It's just called The EVM is the Moat, and you can Google the Daily Gwei after that, and it'll come up with that blog post there. So Risk Harbour, a project that's offering, risk management marketplace for DeFi, aka you could think about like smart contract insurance and things like that. They launched the first ever automated risk management hack simulator that they're calling it. So what this tool does is it basically allows users to simulate a protocol hack, file a claim, then receive a payout in under 45 seconds, all on live contracts. So I thought this was really cool because what we've seen play out, I think, with a lot of these smart contract insurance protocols is that you don't know if you're going to get a payout. You don't know what that payout's going to look like. You don't know if it's going to apply to such and such smart contract. You don't know if it's going to apply to the exact exploit that happened on there. You may not know that with Risk Harbour either, but I think what this does is it gives you a better idea because it lets you simulate. It basically, what you could do is you could say, okay, well, I'm putting $1,000 into Yearn. What happens if this Yearn vault is exploited? And then you can kind of simulate that with using this tool. So yeah, if you haven't checked out this tool, be sure to do so. It's at this URL here, simulator.riskharbor.com. But yeah, I think we need more of this. I think risk and smart contract, just, exploitability in general is still something that's overlooked by a lot of people. And a lot of people think, oh no, it can't happen to me. Even though we've seen plenty of exploits and rug pulls and hacks that have happened in the past. And I think a lot of people still aren't taking out kind of coverage or smart or insurance on their positions. And I think actually to get there, we do need it to be integrated into these apps so it's one click. So you can imagine going to Yearn and saying, okay, well, I'm going to go in this vault, and then having like a little checkbox that says, okay, would you like insurance? Would you like coverage on this? And you just tick it and you get coverage on it. Sort of like when you go to kind of, post something at like the post office or whatever, and you kind of fill out the option, yes, I would like insurance on this package just in case something happens to it. That's the only way you're going to kind of get mass adoption there, I believe, because people aren't going to go out of their way to basically say, okay, well, I open this position, now I take this position to Risk Harbour or Nexus Mutual, whatever, and then I insure it over there. You kind of need that one-click thing to make it easier for people and make people's lives easier when, getting smart contract support and things like that. So yeah, going to be really excited to see how that plays out across all the smart contract insurance and coverage protocols as time goes on. All right, finally, Argent has introduced their layer 2 waitlist. So it's not their layer 2 kind of implementation yet, but essentially you can sign up on their waitlist at flash.argent.xyz, and you can go in the running to win a $270,000 crypto sweepstake to celebrate. Now, they've been teasing this L2 kind of integration for a while. They're going to be using ZK Sync for this, which I think is really cool. But essentially, I'm imagining they're basically going to enable, people through the Argent mobile wallet app to use L2 to do a variety of things, or basically anything that's on ZK Sync. And I'm sure that they're going to be adding other L2s as well, like Optimism and Arbitrum. And this is really how we get mass adoption on these L2s, because as I said, I've said many times, there's three key kind of like adoption, or at least onboarding vehicles that need to be in place for L2 to see mass adoption. One of them is centralized exchange with onboarding. The second one is batched onboarding from L1. The third one is direct fiat on-ramps, which I think the third one is direct fiat on-ramps and mobile wallet on-ramps. It kind of like one and the same, because Argent has direct fiat onboarding onto that. So essentially what you could do is you can go from like your bank account to Argent to an L2. And that's how we're going to get those that mass adoption happening. Because at the end of the day, if you still have to pay a layer 1 fee to get onto layer 2, that's going to scare a lot of people away, especially if that fee is like $50. And you have to do it for like each asset as well. And, Stellar Networks has a product out there, layer 2 finance, which allows you to batch things together, which is working really well. But on top of that, we also need like something for new users, because that would be for more existing users. I think we need something for new users, and that means mobile wallet apps having direct and native integration with L2s and fiat on-ramping through that as well. So yeah, if you haven't signed up for this waitlist yet, be sure to do so. It'll be linked in the YouTube description. But on that note, that is it for today. So thank you everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give that video a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Thanks everyone.